Tennessee Titans fans, it is time for a little off-season Tuesday tier ranking, and this is going to be a fun one with some names that you probably haven't heard in a while. We are going to be tier ranking Tennessee Titans wide receivers from 2000 all the way until now, and we're going to be putting them into one of these 5 tiers. I have put as many wide receivers here as I can remember. We've got top 5. That's the top tier. Then we've got solid, guys who are not quite in the top 5, but did a solid job. Then we've got mid. Then we've got a category just called just kind of there. Just kind of there. These were guys who were just, they're just in the building. They were a part of the team. And then at the bottom, of course, we've got bust, reserved for the guys who were bust, whether through free agency or the draft. So let's get things going. And we're starting with a bang. We're starting with a bang with Drew by God Bennett. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, this might be a controversial one right off the bat, but to me, Drew Bennett is a top fiver. Drew Bennett is a top fiver for the Titans. When you look at that era, because that era, we were coming out of the Derek Mason, Kevin Dyson days, and Drew Bennett was a dog. Now, he is remembered for that playoff game where he dropped the pass right in his hand, similar to what we saw with the Bills tight end Dalton Kincaid the other night. But Drew Bennett, I mean, he was, other than that play, he was automatic. Made some huge plays for the Titans in the early 2000s. Drew Bennett, to me, is a top fiver. Brandon Jones. You want to talk about a name you probably haven't thought about in a long time. Brandon Jones. In the Vince Young days. Brandon Jones is just kind of there. Brandon Jones was just kind of there. He was a person on the team. Had some catches here and there, but I mean, the fact that when I said Brandon Jones, you probably said, who the heck is that? Probably tells you about all you need to know. Chris Moore. We're getting into more recent times here with Chris Moore. Now, this is a tough one because Chris Moore, what was he, wide receiver 3, I guess? He had some huge catches. Like, he was always good for one huge catch a game. I don't think he had any touchdowns. So I'm not going to let those couple of nice catches he made along the way fool me. He was just kind of there. Chris Moore was just kind of there. He was supposed to be behind D-Hop and Traylon, and then Traylon, of course, got hurt, and then he kind of tried to step in, but then NWI jumped him, so I don't know. He was just kind of there. Derek Mason. Oh, my goodness. You already know where he's going. Derek Mason's a top fiver. Derek Mason is a top fiver, no doubt. One of my favorite Titans of all time. Derek Mason, I mean, the iconic punt return against the Jaguars in the AFC Championship game, but Derek Mason was such an agile, electric player for the Titans in the late 90s and into the early 2000s. Derek Mason, 100% top 5. And we go from one top fiver to another because we go to Kevin Dyson, the heartbreaker, Kevin Dyson. We still have those images of him 1 yard short in the Super Bowl. We also have the images of him returning the Music City Miracle. Kevin Dyson is easily a top 5. Kevin Dyson, easily a top 5 wide receiver for the Titans. Now, I want to say this. Just pause the list. It is already a bad sign that we have 3 of our top 5 in place, and they're all from the late 90s and the early 2000s. That's not good. That's a bad sign for where we are headed. Justin McCareins. Speaking of the early 2000s, is that a name you haven't thought of in a while? Justin, by God, McCareins. He did some good things. Like, I remember the playoff game against the Steelers. He had some huge plays in that game. He had a touchdown against Baltimore in a playoff game the next year. I mean, you know what? I'd say Justin McCareins was solid. I think Justin McCareins was solid. I mean, you know, wasn't ever like wide receiver one, but for his role on the team, like he was a big player in special teams, had some punt returns. Yeah, Justin McCareins was solid. Taywan Taylor. Marcus Mariota days. Taywan Taylor was mid. Taywan Taylor was mid. I mean, he's always hurt. Felt like he was just one of those guys who's always hurt, very fragile. And had speed, was a deep, down the field threat sometimes, but just I don't think any defenses ever lost sleep preparing for Taywan Taylor. So he goes into the mid category. Adam Humphries, I mean, he was on that team that went to the AFC Championship. I think that was the only year he was here. No, he was back in 2020. So he was here for 2 years. I mean, overall, he was just kind of there. And the reason he was just kind of there is because, I mean, in 2020, that was that team with a rare, really good Tennessee Titans offense. AJ and Derrick Henry and Corey Davis. That was the only year he ever really lived up, even did anything resembling living up. But we'll talk about him in a second. Yeah, Adam Humphries in the grand scheme of things was just kind of there. Kenny Britt. Kenny Britt. We all remember that regular season game against Philadelphia where he went off. We all remember the game-winning touchdown on the last play against Arizona. I mean, Kenny Britt, a good physical specimen, had good size, not consistent enough, I think. I think a lot of his reputation is mostly built off of those moments here and there, the game winner against Arizona, the game where he went off against Philly. Like, we remember those moments, but overall, Kenny Britt was just never, he wasn't consistent enough, but he had some great, and he was here in an era where Tennessee Titans were terrible. I guess Kenny Britt was solid. I'll say Kenny Britt was solid. I mean, you got to keep in mind he was the only wide receiver threat on the whole team. So we'll say Kenny Britt was solid. A.J. Brown. Top 5. Absolutely top 5. Undoubtedly. Would have been top 1 undoubtedly if we had just done the right thing and kept him. It is unbelievable to me. I will never get over it. I will never stop talking about it. The fact that we easily had the best wide receiver that we have ever had, and we drafted him. We were fortunate enough to draft him in the second round of the 2019 draft. He was ours. And like a bunch of morons. Like, that's the thing that losers do. That's the sort of thing that trash can organizations do, is trade away guys like that for a cup of coffee. Idiots. Dorial Green Beckham. Bust. quite nearly the bust of all bust. I mean, we all had high hope. We all thought that he was going to be an A.J. Brown type player. He had that size, just had that speed and that, just big frame that you thought he could dominate, take over games. What a bust. DeAndre Hopkins. Was here on a year where we had a terrible offense, and then obviously we traded him this season, but he still had over 1,000 yards on a year where we had Tannehill in, and then Malik played some, and then Will Levis took over, and he still managed to find 1,000 yards. For that, I will say DeAndre Hopkins goes into the solid category. DeAndre Hopkins, yeah. I mean, obviously, he's with Kansas City now, getting ready to play in the Super Bowl. That's about the only thing I would like if the Chiefs won, is to see D-Hop get a ring. But D-Hop was classy. in Nashville, showed nothing but love, has done that since he left, and he played extremely well. I mean, even before he got traded this season, he was probably performing the best of any of our wide receivers at that time. So D-Hop, solid. Eric Decker. I mean, I'm going to say bust. I'm going to say bust because, I mean, when he came here, everybody was pumped about Eric Decker. It was like, oh my God, we got Eric Decker? This dude, played with Manning, and, you know, it's just like, I mean, he had the touchdown in the playoff game, which we remember, but like, I mean, this dude didn't do nothing. He was like a non-factor. I'm not going to say that's all his fault because, I mean, we had the Terry Robisky offense at that time, so God help us. Julio Jones. Man, I remember how excited I was when the Titans signed Julio Jones. Pairing him with AJ, I mean, it just felt like match made in heaven. But at the end of the day, he was just kind of there. He was just kind of like, yeah, at times you would see flashes of Julio, but I mean, the injuries, it was just ridiculous. Like, he was never healthy 2 weeks in a row. It was always something. Didn't have his first touchdown into the final regular season game. Just wasn't what we wanted him to be. So yeah, I just kind of there, and that's a heartbreaker. Calvin Ridley, it's early. I mean, obviously we've had one season, but I will give him credit. I don't want to put him too high just because we have such a small sample size of him because he's had 1 year, and obviously what a doozy of a year it was. For now, I'm going to put him in mid. I'm going to put him in mid for now solely because we don't have more to see. But I will say him reaching over 1,000 yards this season for the Titans is pretty impressive on his part. Like, to be able to find 1,000 yards with as bad of quarterback play as he had this season for the Titans, he deserves some credit for that. But I don't want to put him any higher than mid just because it's so early in the process with him. Rishard Matthews, I thought about putting him in the top 5. I really did. I thought about putting Rishard Matthews in the top 5. I think people forget for a season or two how good he was for the Titans. I mean, he was a touchdown machine. He's going to go into solid. Now, ultimately, when AJ came in and Corey Davis came in, Rishard Matthews left. But during those in-between years where we were just trying to find anybody that could come in and give us a spark, Rishard Matthews was actually solid for the Titans. Tyrone Calico. How's that for a name that you haven't heard in a long time? Tyrone Calico, an early 2000s Titans wide receiver who took the job. I want to say this was coming out. I think Kevin Dyson had left, and I guess I'll say Calico was mid. I'm going to put Calico into mid. He didn't have that same spark. Like, he came in and he took Kevin Dyson's number, and it was just like watching a Dollar General Kevin Dyson. Robert Woods, I'm going to put him into bust. Just, I mean, again, it kind of the same as the Eric Decker, Julio Jones type thing. Like, when we signed Robert Woods, I was very excited about that. It was like, oh man, Robert Woods. He's played in the Super Bowl with the Rams. He's a perfect addition to this offense. I mean, my guy came in here and just did nothing. Did he score any? I think he scored one touchdown from like Josh Dobbs at the end. Like, he just didn't. I mean, and again, not all his fault. I mean, because Lord knows those Vrabel offenses were a doozy, but I mean, he just didn't do anything. Nate Washington. I thought about putting Nate Washington in the top 5. I really did. But ultimately, he goes into solid, verging on top 5. I mean, verging on top 5. But I put him into solid. just was here at a time when we really weren't good. And he was like one of the only bright spots on the offense. Man, he might be top 5. I might come back to that. Justin Gage, one of the most underrated wide receivers in Titans history, because this dude used to catch everything thrown to him. He goes into the solid category too. You might remember Justin Gage, Vince Young, Kerry Collins, those days in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Justin Gage was kind of a dog for like a year or two. Ultimately, it fizzled out, but he caught everything. Treylon Burks. Easy bust. Easy bust. I mean, just miserable. A.J. Brown has more Super Bowl appearances than Treylon Burks has touchdowns. It's just awful. Kendall Wright was mid. I mean, he's kind of an exact replica of Taywan Taylor. I mean, injured a lot, speedy guy, number 13. Could beat you deep, but just wasn't. Just, again, like I said about Taywan Taylor, just not a guy that I don't think any defenses lost sleep preparing for Kendall Wright. Justin Hunter. Again, we remember a couple of good moments with Justin Hunter, but he goes into bust. I mean, I remember people were so excited because he was from Tennessee, University of Tennessee, and everybody wants somebody to come from the University of Tennessee to the Titans and go off. Everybody had high hopes for Justin Hunter. Just never was what it needed to be at all. I mean, I don't think he was big enough. Didn't have size. Speed was so-so. Had length. Had a couple of nice moments with the touchdown against the Chargers to win, but just never really more than that. Corey Davis. I mean, I'm tempted to put him into bust, but I'm gonna put Corey into mid. He had the 2020 season when he was a wide receiver 2 behind A.J. Brown. That was the best season that he ever had. Close to 1,000 yards receiving. Actually was an explosive part of the offense. But outside of that, it was just, it was better than Treylon. Absolutely better than Treylon. But just never, outside of that 2020 season when he was number 2 behind A.J., it never quite clicked the way it needed to. And he was I think we picked him number 5. He was a top 5 draft pick. So that's why I'm tempted to put bust. But I mean, he had, had talent, just wasn't the guy we needed. Just, again, didn't have the size. Yeah, just wasn't that guy. And last but not least is Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I'm wrestling with this because I was going to put him in the top 5. Literally, when you look at what he has done for the Titans, touchdowns, yards, always finding a way to get open, being so reliable, and, making a way, even when, Treylon gets hurt, D-Hop gets traded, AJ gets traded, Robert Woods doesn't pan out. I mean, all of these things, and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is just always there. He's always there. Not the fastest guy, not the biggest guy, not the strongest guy, but just a guy who somehow finds the end zone. And so I was going to put him in top 5, but ultimately I got to be respectful. I'm going to move NWI down to solid, and I'm going to move Nate Washington up to top 5. I'm going to move Nate Washington up to top 5. I mean, I'm tempted. I think I would put Nick Westbrook-Ikhine number 6. If that's the top 5, I think I'd put him number 6. But ultimately, I think I'm not going to let the recency bias get me. I'm going to put Nate Washington top 5, and I'm going to move Nick Westbrook-Ikhine down to solid. Close, but I'm going to go with Nate. So the top 5, Drew Bennett, Derek Mason, Kevin Dyson, A.J. Brown, and Nate Washington, in no particular order, of course. Solid Justin McCarron, Kenny Britt, DeAndre Hopkins, Rashard Matthews, Justin Gage, and Nick Westbrook-Akine. Mid, Taywan Taylor, Calvin Ridley, just because we don't have enough, we haven't seen enough of them yet. Tyrone Calico, Kendall Wright, and Corey Davis. Just kind of there. Brandon Jones, Chris Moore, Adam Humphries, and Julio Jones. And bust, Dorial Green-Beckham, Eric Decker, Robert Woods, Treylon Burks, and Justin Hunter. Again, not a good sign that 3 of our top 5 are from the late 90s and the early 2000s. And Nate Washington is from the late 2000s. It's been over a decade since Nate Washington was here. So, tough group of wide receivers. Let me know what you think, Titans fans. Bye.